Welcome to Keen on Green with Evan Rigsby, the podcast that dives deep into the world of environmental consulting from a multitude of perspectives. Join your host, Evan Rigsby, as he explores the intricate challenges and innovative solutions within the environmental sector. Whether you're a professional in the field, a student looking to make a difference, or simply a curious listener, this podcast promises to deliver interviews with experts and real-world case studies. Stay tuned as we unravel the green mysteries with Evan, one episode at a time.
Welcome, everyone, to the kickoff episode of Keen on Green with yours truly, Evan Rigsby. This is your go-to podcast for all things environmental consulting. We're going to view it through the lens of experts who are making a real difference in the world today. That being said, this will be a monthly podcast interviewing experts with various backgrounds, seeing what it's like in their day-to-day actions and what their roles look like. Today, I'm excited to chat with Justin Martins, a very sharp and talented environmental scientist currently at Haley and Aldrich over in Maryland. So grab your coffee, settle in, grab your popcorn, because we have a really, really exciting conversation today. And without further ado, Justin, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Well, thank you, Evan, for that introduction. It's been an honor to accept the initial invitation for your first podcast, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. And maybe to set a little background, I mean, you and I kind of had pretty much been doing this for a couple of years now. We've definitely had minimum a quarterly phone call for half an hour for several years now. So I'm glad to kind of put that effort into something interesting for you to present. And yeah, I think it's a great opportunity as someone who is relatively enthusiastic about the industry and has enjoyed the aspects of it, to be able to provide you and your clients and prospective clients in the future a little aspect, a little snippet of some of the stuff that I do. So super pumped to be on.
Absolutely. And, for all our viewers out there, Justin is a long-term friend of mine, and it's been really exciting to see his journey growing throughout the industry. So I think that's a perfect segue. So can you tell, the viewers out there a little bit about your role, how you got involved with Haley and Aldrich, but, from a day-to-day perspective, what do you do within the consulting industry, and what does that look like for you?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question, and I'll try to tackle it one by one. So environmental consulting is this kind of general umbrella term, and there's many different facets in the industry. There's not just one, this is what a consultant does, this is what an environmental scientist or professional does in the industry. That definitely looks different at other companies, other organizations. So specifically what I've been doing and what I currently do is my discipline's focused in the contaminated site management group. I've focused on efforts on remediation and redevelopment and site investigation and characterization. It's very dynamic and interesting fields. Not one day is this same. Every week, every day is very different and dynamic. So keeps you on your toes, and there's a lot of work to be done out there. And kind of before we go maybe too far into it, I mean, I remember I actually spoke with Sean back in like 2016, and when I was still in college, and I think this podcast might be kind of really good for folks like a 17 to 22-year-old version of myself, getting into college, trying to figure out what there is in the industry, and then what you can do with the degree and what kind of jobs are out there. I think it's a pretty important conversation. And then, so specifically, we can get into that. But yeah, every day is a little bit different. And so let me, I guess let's settle back from that tangent. What would you want to talk about first?
Well, off of that, I had a question because, going back to your college days like you talked about, and I think there's a big thing with our industry where a lot of people don't necessarily understand it in the beginning. So I remember I was talking with someone who had zero experience with consulting, and they're like, "Oh, it's about trees and recycling," and I'm like, it's a little bit more than that, right? So for someone who, like you said, is maybe entering college, maybe even in high school, and so forth, but is interested in remediation, is interested in working with soil. What does that mean? Like from a day-to-day perspective, if you guys are working on a project, working on a site, what does that kind of mean for someone that wants to get into this?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different site surfaces that I've been a part of. I think predominantly we can talk about what a phase one environmental site assessment is, and that's kind of the framework. Really, we can sum that down to an initial environmental review of a property, specifically looking at what a REC is, recognized environmental condition on the property, and that's done. That phase one report is done for multiple reasons. Evaluating risk is a predominant reason. So once we have the phase one, we can go into other investigation type of field work. So phase two, namely, and now we're talking about going out in the field and looking at the actual contents, the subsurface contents of that property. So many different ways we can collect samples out in the field. One of which, I guess most basic, might be just hand tools, shovel, hand auger for superficial stuff. A lot of times we'll use a backhoe or an excavator to get into the subsurface and take a look at what we're looking at.
So when you say stuff like that, not to interrupt you, when you say stuff like that and you're working with, your clients, so, when people hear something like that, what types of clients are you working with? Are you working with, companies? Are you working with organizations? Like, what sort of clients could use your services?
Right. So site investigation, predominantly I've worked with real estate clients. So in order to get lending from a bank, a phase one is typically required, and a lot of times the residential developer or commercial, even industrial developer would need to supply the phase one if there's potential for contamination that we have identified on that phase one. They're going to want to proceed to see what level of contamination that there might be or might not be. If there's contamination on the property, it might not actually exceed a threshold set by the state. And there is different categories. There's a residential cleanup standard. There's a commercial cleanup standard. You might have contamination on the property, but it could be below the concern of the regulatory authority. Also, Maryland and Virginia, Pennsylvania, most, don't quote me, but a lot of states out there have what we have a voluntary cleanup program, or other states might call it voluntary remediation program. Essentially, if you do find contamination on a site, there is a state framework and regulation that you can be guided from with the consultant. So work that I've been a part of that actually, Brownfield's incentive or revitalization program takes the vacant and abandoned industrial properties. Phase one identified certain previous site uses. We go in for the phase two, sample the soil, groundwater, etc., and then present that to the client, and then they could, we can use that to get state regulatory oversight for the project, and it has huge tax implications for the developer, and they can save pretty good chunk of cash at the back end with their tax liability. So there's a financial incentive to actually take on impacted properties, and that's predominantly a lot of the work that I've actually been a part of, and there's a lot we can go into talk about that too. And to kind of flip back, we can also use drill rigs to go down however deep you want to go, 25 feet, 90 feet down in the subsurface, and collect samples at that exact elevation. And
that's phenomenal. And I might pause you there for a sec. So you had talked a little bit about the client, you talked a little bit about drilling, the sampling.
Of course.
So for somebody who's never had experience in this, it's typically not necessarily just you, working on a project. You're working with a team, each company's different and so forth. Can you talk a little bit, with some of the work that you've done, how does that team structure look like? Do you have, people above you that are doing different aspects, or do you have multiple people in the field? How do you work typically together as a team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And all the work that you would do under is beneath a principal consultant. There's no like one individual in an organization that's going to take on all the work. And even if the principal consultant is going to be out in the field, there's always people checking reports and sampling analyses and just overall like work plan prep. So yeah, so for me at my level, I would be doing various different field activities, and then also going back in the office, completing summarization of those activities, and then once we get the analysis back from the lab, we use a third party chemical lab, and once we get our suite of analyses back for the soil or groundwater or whatever media we're testing, there's a decent amount of effort to organize that information and present it into summarization for the client or statement of some sort of findings to the state. So yeah, when you're on a job site, we typically will subcontract a drilling company if that's the scope, right? And then it'll be typically 1 to 2 field professionals on a site. So myself and somebody else actually assisting with the sample collection. I don't, I'm not behind the drill rig putting in casing, but I process the sample. We use boring logs to classify the soil, note any specific conditions if we're seeing, suspect contamination, petroleum odors. We'll use different pieces of equipment, site specific, tools such as like a photo ionization detector. PID is pretty common. Just sniff volatiles come right from the ground, and it'll be able to give us somewhat of a guidance of if we're in a solvent plume or petroleum impacted location. But yeah, drilling is fun. It's kind of loud. Definitely have PPE on. Your safety is huge in this industry. Not that a lot can go wrong, but a lot could go wrong.
Yeah.
So hard hat and gloves and glasses and all that stuff's very important to stress. But it's very cool. I mean, I will, routinely look at a soil core, 40 feet, 50 feet plus down, and not many people get the opportunity to look at what they're standing on top of, and it's pretty neat.
I mean, let me ask you, and going back to your college days, sort of what you mentioned, and now that you've actually had the experience, being out there, trying stuff out, the stuff you do every day, what would you say has been most rewarding for you? Like your thoughts, coming into the industry, and then now from what you know now, what's been like the biggest eye openers, or like things that have been like, wow, this is really cool stuff. Like what kind of sticks with you?
Well, I guess in terms of greatest reward, I think it's definitely just site redevelopment and driving past former brownfield or industrial site use that's been vacant for decades or maybe even more, taking that property and being a part of that team that gets to say, okay, well, what happened, and collect samples and guide the client through the redevelopment process, and then down goes the buildings, and maybe we remove soil or other site features like a underground storage tank or hydraulic lift, and then just being a part of the redevelopment process, and then driving back past the site. Maybe I'm going somewhere else and I see, beautiful residential or mixed-use commercial property, and you can physically, tangibly see like, oh, 2 years ago, an eyesore in the property. No one, it was probably unsafe to even walk past. And now, with the assistance with multiple stakeholders and developers and contractors and the work that we did, it's now like premier spot to live and shops and stuff like that. So I think that aspect, on a human sense too, like you can physically see it and be a part of that job, is pretty rewarding.
I'm with you, and I remember I was in Brooklyn one time, and it was this old factory area to what you're talking about, and I was there before it got clean, and it was just really nasty. It was disgusting, and then I came back years later, and it's pristine. You got restaurants, you got shops, and it was like a full 360. So obviously each project is different, and when you're working on and you're getting involved in a project like that, I'm sure it's not necessarily the easiest, just jumping into it and getting started. From your perspective and kind of what you do, what are some of the biggest challenges? So if you're getting started on one of those projects, or you're trying to get into one of those projects, where do you see a lot of challenges come into play, or even while you're in the middle of it? What sort of things do you notice?
Yeah, so I'll try to guide that answer through the life cycle of the project, and I think for younger, so I guess maybe to set the stage, I have about 4 to 5 years experience. I have a bachelor's of science in environmental science, and so relatively new to the consulting career, I would say. I think first of all, understanding the framework for regulations is very important, and oftentimes I try to memorize certain like threshold values for certain contaminants, but it's hard. There's a lot to look at. ASTM, so everything that we do is go under ASTM. So for maybe folks not in the industry, it's American Standard for Testing of Materials, and they have guidance for all that we do, and you need to know ASTM. There's no way around it, and obviously you work beneath principal consultant, and they have 25 plus years, and they'll help you. But for me, as more of a younger situation here, referencing that and understanding that has definitely been a challenge, and I'm obviously been growing with it, and it's been great. I think when it comes to in the field challenges, obviously weather could be an iffy one.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes it's raining, man, and it doesn't matter. Or conversely, it's like 99 degrees for like, always when you're out in the field in the summer, it's just hot, just brutal. And so battling maybe some heat stress and stuff like that. But more in relation to the work, I think, challenges definitely come with, contractor relations. Sometimes, all the times, the contractor is there to do what they're supposed to do. Excavate for the foundation, whatever they're up to. A lot of times, they're not really filled in on what we call the EMP, the Environmental Management Plan, and they might run into an underground storage tank and not tell us for 2 days, which is not good. It's against the law. Yeah. And there's a lot of stipulations where, was there contamination beneath that? We need to call oil control program. We need to collect samples, document this, and we can't always be on a site 24/7. Contractors aren't communicating. If communication with the contractors isn't great, or they just really don't care, which I've had both instances, that's produces a big challenge. So, yeah, definitely.
So let me ask you, I think you hit home on one thing where you're talking about, a huge aspect is constantly learning. Staying on top of those regulations, knowing your stuff. There's a great deal of knowledge that comes when you're coming into these projects.
Of course.
So for somebody who's maybe even at your experience level or maybe above, what have been things for you of getting connected with mentors, getting connected with organizations? Because for a lot of people, and even folks that I've talked with, not everyone has the liberty of having somebody who's maybe their manager being, a good mentor. If that's the case, fantastic. And I know for you, you've had a fantastic mentor with your manager. So for people that want to get involved with mentors, learning, organizations, anything you might recommend?
Yeah, so I guess most regions in the country probably have like building council or authority, and a lot of like engineers and consultants will join those, and they'll have meetings on a monthly, maybe quarterly basis. That's probably a good place to get involved with. In fact, the company that you work for probably is already a member. That would be pretty paramount. Obviously, I would say within the chain of your own company, definitely reach out to other consultants and never be afraid to ask questions. And I think you post something pretty well in your last statement. And I think curiosity is a very big skill. It's not something that's touch based on a lot, but especially within this industry, there's a lot to cover. I mean, I know friends who have the same title as I do in different companies, but they do way different work. And I guess inversely, there's growing amounts of work that this industry is dynamic, and I think being curious and asking questions, finding mentors, and finding organizations to be part of is advantageous to you at that level of your career. Whether you're just starting, whether you're 4 to 5 years in, or even more, asking questions and getting involved and putting yourself out there is pretty paramount to your growth. I would definitely say.
Absolutely. So, as we kind of near the end of our podcast here, we're going to look a little bit to the future. We're going to look a little bit to the future here. So, in your opinion, what are some things where you see the industry maybe changing, adapting, getting more involved with? I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, how do you kind of see environmental consulting changing from what we traditionally see today?
Yeah, let's see. It's an interesting question. I think there's maybe different responses I can probably give. I think in terms of like services, what might be changing in the future, and I thought about this before, and there's pretty much like three main. Well, let's just say, in my maybe younger experience, like three categories of work that might be expanding, or branches of work that are going to proliferate, and no specific order, but one would definitely be like climate resiliency and like ESG work. There's been a lot of stuff popping up with that. I'm really not familiar with what that might look like. I do know it's just been like a buzz. I think two would be like renewable industry. Energy industry is going to advance for sure. Offshore wind, other turbines and solar projects are only advancing day by day, year by year. With that kind of comes, I guess, in tandem, infrastructure projects in relation to energy and electricity. And I think the third branch would probably be just generally like emerging contaminants, right? So most notably, most recent we would be talking about PFAS, and honestly, I don't have a whole lot of familiarity with recent legislation about that, but it's obviously where services with the industry is heading to is to cover emerging contaminants. So,
right.
Yeah.
For those who don't know what PFAS is, how would you describe it to them?
Let me go on Google real quick and no, I mean it's very tough to pinpoint, but it's essentially a chemical that's been used, applied for many decades for like waterproofing and weatherproofing, and has many different uses, and it's honestly on everything, and it's everywhere, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint, maybe how exactly it gets into the environment. In some instances, it's very obvious, like certain site activities led to the release of certain PFAS into waterways and stuff like that. But I think like the proliferation of those chemicals is pretty grand. I've read somewhere like they found PFAS in like ice in Antarctica.
Oh my gosh!
It's like plastic. It's everywhere. It's it's kind of hard to get a pulse on, but I'm certainly not qualified to speak too much on it, so that's what I'll say.
Definitely exciting, though. Definitely exciting. So I got an exciting last part of the podcast. I call it the rapid fire questions. I'm just going to shoot 2 or 3 just really quick questions, just to the best of your ability, just off the top of your head, what comes to mind. So,
All right.
Going back to education, knowledge, all that stuff, any books, websites, conference names, anything at all that helped you get to where you are now that you'd recommend somebody check out?
I'm not really too sure. Books, nothing comes to mind. Conferences, I don't know, man. I think this is like a real niche, maybe portion of the industry, and especially with the work that you do. And this podcast is probably like one of the first of its kind. I would say what has helped me gain understanding of the work that I do is blanketly the work that I've done, like the career that I'm in, the places that I've worked, has definitely led me to my understanding. Education for sure. Talk to your professors. Number one. I mean, be friends with some of your professors. I had a professor that worked for the MDE, the Maryland Department of the Environment, and he was pretty instrumental at showing me so I work in the probably private sector, and he worked in the public sector, and showing me the relationship between the two and the consulting, and getting to know professors, being engaged in your coursework 100%. Read into it. I mean, I actually, to answer maybe your question a little better, it's boring, but like your textbooks, like I will go back to my textbooks and I'll read certain chapters, like, oh yeah, like that is in legitimate pursuit of what I currently do. Just to review what I learned in school, in relationship to what I do for work, is pretty important. But honestly, in terms of like conferences and other types of broad organizations, not too much. And I know this is a rapid fire question, but just to kind of go back with what I had touched on earlier about curiosity. I mean, this industry is very dynamic, it's very broad, and there's a lot of work you can get going on. And finding people and finding resources is very important. So be open and be curious to your career. And I started doing something different for sure. What I started off doing was not what I'm doing now, but it's up to you to analyze yourself and see what this industry has to offer, and has to offer a lot. So talk to your managers and talk to your professors and see, be curious and ask questions, and don't take no for an answer. If you want to do something, like go and do it and go and find it. I like where I'm at and what I'm doing, and it feels good to say that. So yeah.
I love that, man. I love that. So the very last rapid fire question is, imagine, Justin back in college again, Justin back in high school. Anything else that, again, knowing what you know now, that you'd want to share with him?
Mm-hmm.
You have, again, somebody in high school, somebody in college, somebody just starting out maybe for their first year. I think you hit it perfectly where you had kind of talked about, things aren't going to necessarily come to you. You have to have that self-starterness to you. In reaching out to those resources, talking with professors, looking for mentors and stuff. But anything else you'd say to somebody who's in high school, college, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, top of what we got talked about, I think, keeping an open mind on what experiences you might have and what come up, and not everything is super glamorous with any job, really. I think if you are a type of person, and we find in this industry is a theme of people. If you are interested in science, and if you're interested in tackling like real world contemporary problems and being a part of a solution, it's a great place to be. There's a lot of time spent out in the field, especially when you start off. You're probably going to be outside quite a bit. If you don't like being outside, there's other jobs to do for sure. I think being comfortable with the office work as well, like reporting, internal communication is huge. I think you'll best suit yourself for your career with being comfortable and confident in both realms of the industry, both field efforts and office efforts. What I want to say is, just work hard and ask questions. And I think attitude is something that I wanted to touch on. I think in general, people, their attitude makes all the difference. And not just work, it's your personal relationships, it's how you view your work with the macro scope of your life, and showing up every day with a good attitude, being conversational, being pleasant to be around will take you so far. So far, really. Like when you're in high school, when you're in college, you think, oh, I'm just going to get good grades and I'm going to get a good job and all that stuff. It's like, no, keeping your head up and working hard and having a goal and having just a resilient attitude, it's huge. It's very underrated. I think working on yourself, becoming the best person who you are, will make you the best professional that you can be. And I heard a quote one time, and maybe I'll leave it at this, and it's to become the best person at your job, you need to become the best person in your own life. Starts off with you.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. I like that.
It starts off with you, and you can't expect to change the world, obviously, and do everything that you can do unless, you ask yourself of it too. So,
I couldn't have said it any better. And, Justin, I just want to say thank you so much for, hopping on the podcast, being our very first guest. And it's a great episode. We're going to, for all the viewers listening, we're going to publish it on our accounts. We'll also keep it on the website if you want to play it in audio. And, going forward, every month, we're going to have a guest from a different perspective, similar to our conversation with Justin, seeing what it's like with a day in their life. But Justin, thank you so much. Another so much for being here today. It was great talking with you.
My pleasure. And like I said, can't thank you, enough to invite me for your initial podcast, and it's my honor also to support a friend and support a business. So thank you.
Oh man, same here, and you're like a brother to me.
Yeah, likewise.
All right, thanks everybody, and this was the very first episode of Keen on Green. Take care.